Nota bene. Opinions expressed are solely those of the author, Alexander Harrison, and are protected under the Bill of Rights to the Constitution and derived from English common law. Dear Dick, il me fait de la peine de vous dire ceci, but the truth must be revealed. Not once in the more than 40 years that I've known you. First as my PhD advisor at New York University, then through intermittent contacts, including exchanges of letters, dinners, did you ever make a good faith effort to help me secure a position at the university or college levels. The same indifference was manifested by your colleagues, whom I considered once not only as mentors, but as friends, Professor Scally, Andrews, and Blackwell, may he rest in peace, and Stu Salem. Personally, I view you as le plus coupable, since you were my advisor. To employ a metaphor, you left Alexander Harrison twisting in the wind. The only faculty member who showed any appreciation of my research on social movements in Algeria during the war, during the years leading up to independence, 1954-1962, was Professor Max Kortepeter, who invited me to give a lecture to Rutgers, but never did actually offer to place me in an emporium of higher education. Yet who deserved a university sinecure more than Alexander Harrison? I traveled to Ghana, where you yourself had been, in search of a subject for my dissertation, and spent weeks in Ghana, Upper Volta, later called, as you know, Burkina Faso, and Togo. The following year I was in Rhodesia, as you suggested, to see it once again before it disappeared, as well as to South Africa, Zaire, Kenya, and Congo-Brazzaville, all for the purpose of impressing you and other members of the history department in the hope that there would be a position waiting for me on being awarded a doctoral degree. Hopes deceived. Espérance trahie. Never once did I hear from you or other members of the history department the words, "We are placing you or trying to place you in such or such a university or college." I'm the first to admit, Dick, that existentialism teaches us that we are responsible for our own fate, that ultimately it's up to us individually. Nonetheless, your refusal to go out on a limb to try to help was extraordinary. At times your behavior struck me as loufoque, farcical. The few times that you did recommend me for a university post, it turned out the position did not exist. When I finally decided to return to my first love, French Algeria, and informed you of my intention to focus on an oral history of the counter-revolution in Algeria, 1954-1962, I attacked the subject with fervor, interviewing centaines of the OAS small fry assassins, Menu Frétin, whom Pierre Sergent, head of OAS Metro and former captain in the Premier Régiment Étranger des Parachutistes, called Petit Tueur, and whom I knew personally. as well as renegade generals and colonels, Generals Charles, Salon, Jouot, Colonel Garde, and the Soviétic Capitaine headed by Jacques Achard and Pierre Montagnon, all of whom defected to the underground organization once it became clear that de Gaulle intended to surrender the overseas département to the terrorist FLN. You gave your approval. I was so committed to my subject that when Bob Scally suggested in November 1979 that I had done enough field research in France and Algeria to satisfy the requirements for the degree, I replied negatively that I intended to return abroad to seek more information on other adherents of the clandestine self-defense group whom I had not yet seen, to plumb their thoughts and motives, all for the purpose of fleshing out my dissertation. In fact, I did return to France and North Africa, not to faire la bominette, to show off, but to let Scally and all of you know the depth, the ardor of my commitment. Yet my immersion research, witnessed by 3 books, one of which appeared in French, thanks to Harmattan, under the title Défi à de Gaulle, published 2008, and videotaped essays on the death of French Algeria, never paid off in terms of a position in an emporium of higher learning, since you did not make a sincere attempt to place me at a college or university, a gesture which you were willing to make for others whose work was not so meritorious. Let me remind you that I am licensed in 2 foreign languages, French and Spanish, and have a basic working knowledge of Wolof, having accomplished 2 tours of duty in Senegal. First as a Fulbright in 1994 and 1995, assigned to teach at Lycée JFK in Colobane, outside of Dakar, and then as a teacher trainer in the Basse Casamance, often sent to schools en brousse while a civil war between separatists and the armed forces was being waged. All told, I earned my living in West Africa for 4 years, without taking into account the extensive field research undertaken in Rhodesia, where I first had the chance to fouler le sol rhodesien in 1965 when I was in Salisbury, and Ian Smith, head of the Rhodesian Front, came out for UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Franchement, how many former students have you advised who could claim that they were in Salisbury on that fateful day, 11 November 1965, when the Rhodesian Front Party declared its independence of the Commonwealth? I was there thanks to an invitation from Roy Walensky, former labor leader and Prime Minister of Northern Rhodesia, whom I had met tout à fait comme par hasard in April of the same year at the St. Moritz Hotel in Manhattan, which he was visiting at the time. Walensky recommended me for a teaching post in Bulawayo, which I eagerly accepted. Times newspaper thought highly enough of my writing to run an op-ed article of mine for White Rule in Rhodesia, published when I returned there years later. You were always ready, Dick, to write an eloquent letter of recommendation, and for that I thank you. But it is the secret de polichinelle that your letters of recommendation, however well crafted, had little to no resonance, since they were never accompanied by an earnest effort by you to actually place me in a college or university. After all, it's not as if you did not have the contacts and did not wield considerable influence in academe and in business circles. You did. In those days, you were in constant touch with Maurice Templesman, Belgian-American businessman with vast holdings in UMHK, l'Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, in Katanga province, later named Shaba, Swahili for copper. Templesman also practically owned the Republic of Gabon, with Omar Bongo, Gabonese chief of state, acting as his Beni Wiwi. He was that influential, the Barney Barnado of Central Africa. Do you not think, Dick, that you could have solicited a job on my behalf, intervened to enlist Templeman's help in securing for me a tenure track position at an American university? You also had a close relationship with Leon Templesman, his son, but you did not lift a finger to help. Templesman was such a power player in the Africa of the 1970s and 80s that I heard also that when you gave that speech to the Parliament in Salisbury shortly after independence was granted to the Patriotic Front in 1980, it was Templesman who was responsible for pulling the strings to make it possible, according to On Dit. I recall times several years ago when you informed me that a colleague, Valerie Deacon, was organizing a symposium on Algeria, my field, my specialty, which I devoted my professional lifetime to, which symposium was, as I recall, held at the Maison Française. I asked you, pleaded with you, to put in a good word for me with Professor Deacon, but to no avail. Likewise, when I asked you whether you could arrange for me to speak on Algeria to other members of the history department, you were equally discouraging. Why? What was the pourquoi of your rejection of my offer? I knew personally and interviewed flanqueurs of the OAS when they were still operational in Algeria, 1961, 1962, and afterwards, after they had been repatriated and amnestied by the French government for their war crimes, as well as surviving members of Delta death squads living subsequently in France. I crossed La Belle France and Algeria several times to find them. Did everything on my dime, my own dime, at my expense. Apart from a small subsidy from the Hoover Institution, thanks to Professors Dugnan and Gans, the latter a native Rhodesian, I paid for the field research out of my own pocket. Consult my books on the subject, as well as my videotape talks on the OAS, one of which I gave at a meeting of the French Colonial Historical Society in Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School in 1999, which harvested rave reviews from those in attendance. See my videotape lectures on youtube.com. I was also an estivant at the Prison Fresnes in 1963, where I was able to conduct interviews with OAS diehards, as well as with a gros bonnet of the Marseille underworld, Joseph Atia, aka Jotia, who went to our cell one day cradling a bottle of Ricard and offered us all a sip. But despite my scholarly achievements, my hands-on research, devotion to my craft, and my goodwill, you did not see fit to actively place me in an emporium of higher learning. Your letters and recommendation, no se offenda, were no more than a faux fouillon, a red herring designed to cover up your reluctance to go all out for a former student. All told, I earned my living in West Africa for 4 years, without counting the months of research in Algeria, in Afrique Blanche, as well as in Rhodesia and the Republic to the south. As mentioned above, and it bears repeating, how many students have you advised who were present in Salisbury in 1965 when Smith announced UDI? As mentioned, Times newspaper thought highly enough of me and my views in Rhodesia to run my op-ed years later for White Rule in Rhodesia, 10 August 1976. The late William Colby wrote as follows in a foreword to my anthology on the OAS, Challenging de Gaulle, Prager and Greenwood Press, 1989. This is a fascinating account of the fighters for a lost cause, full of the brutalities and warped terrorism which characterized the attempts to keep Algeria French after France decided it would be French no longer. Scholarship is thought to consist of paging through dusty tomes and quiet libraries. Mr. Harrison shows us how it can be enlivened by interviewing real participants in events who could tell more about their actions, their convictions, and their confusions than any written record can. Alexander Harrison shows us that a failed revolution and a successful revolution have many similarities, despite the differences in the outcomes, but that the outcome often determines whether the actors become heroes or villains to history. Doubly ironic that the charmante Professor Deacon fancies herself a specialist on the far right in France and wrote a book on the subject, but snubbed Alexander Harrison, who personally knew holdovers from the occupation, die-hard loyalists of Le Maréchal, Pétain, Vichyites, Maurassians, militants of Action Française, who were still around in the 1950s and 1960s when I conducted my field research, and who had gravitated to the OAS when it was formed in April 1961 in the wake of the failure of the putsch to make a last-ditch effort to preserve French sovereignty in Algeria in the face of President de Gaulle's decision to give it all away to the FLN. My input on these radicals, extremists, bien-pensants from another era, should have proved invaluable to Deacon, but she never consulted me. A close photo is of me and Robert Martel, right-wing agriculteur, farmer from the Matijda region in Algeria, who was a close friend of Dr. Martin, chef de renseignement of the death squad active in France in the 1930s, known as the Cagoule. Yet my expertise in this area was never taken seriously by you or other members of the history department. And my theory is that this was due to my conservative views, my support for the cause of French Algeria, as well as for white rule in Rhodesia, which you believed would, in my opinion, would taint you, compromise your chances of getting acceptance by the Speakers Bureau for lucrative gigs on the college lecture circuit, which was very PC at the time. Herbert Weiss, who knows you personally and is a renowned expert on independence movements in the Congo and Leopoldville, confided to me in a telephone conversation and an email that he believed you were a fraud. I do not believe that he was referring to your scholarship, which is first rate, but to your character flaws, promising to use your considerable influence with the Templesmen to help others, but then never coming through. Weiss, as you know, is a real pro, excellent in his field research, speaks fluently Lingala, Swahili, and French, and even at one point in his investigations taught one of Patrice Lumumba's cabinet members, a Minister of Information, Anicet Kashamura, how to use the telephone. As far as I know, Dick, you are monolingual, which hampers your ability to understand African cultures in countries where you have conducted field research, such as Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Not being conversant in the national languages puts you at a considerable disadvantage. When Juliana, my Ghanaian-born wife, who served with me in Bokeh, Guinea, and we were living in a decadent villa overlooking the Rio Nunez, which flows up to Timbuktu and then to the Fouta Djallon Mountains, which we also familiarized ourselves with. There was farther up the street where we lived from our villa, decadent villa, the Peace Corps headquarters, where volunteers would come and regain a second wind after serving months at a time in local villages. The majority spoke fluent Susu, Bul. In terms of their understanding of these local idioms, they would run rings around you and the average Foreign Service officer, who is in many cases indifferent to local mannerisms. Africans, by the way, have the utmost respect for Peace Corps volunteers because of their eagerness to learn the languages of the folk. You accused me of not staying in touch after I was awarded the PhD, but that claim falls into the category of fake news, disinformation, since at least on 2 occasions I invited you to dinner at Pirandello's on Waverly Place, and a 3rd time you invited me to lunch at the faculty lounge, where I recognized a face I had not seen in some time, that of Professor Grosso. I also recall a visit to your office in 2000, where I said hello to Stuart Stalin, who did not reply but looked at me as if I were transparent. He was also a member of the committee which had approved my dissertation. I recall also asking you to pass along a flyer for a video which I had written on the death of French Algeria, still available on YouTube.com, by the way, to Bob Scally, and he replied through you that he was living in Amagansett and could not be bothered viewing it. Scally wasn't helpful, almost scornful of my effort to enlighten him on my research on the final years of French Algeria. Amazing that all those whom I knew from the history department at NYU had sinecures, but did not believe, apparently, that Alexander Harrison, who speaks 2 foreign languages besides having a rudimentary understanding of Wolof, having served 2 years in Senegal, one as a Fulbright and another as a volunteer for Teachers for Africa, IFESH, deserved a sinecure. and I was virtually ignored by those of you in the department who should have pitched in. Perhaps if I had been a person of color, or of another minority which claimed victimhood, you would have shown more interest in my case and been more helpful. Secret de Polichinelle, that in the Chronicle of Higher Education, tenure-track positions advertised carry the proviso, and I paraphrase, that women and persons of color are encouraged to apply. A not-so-subtle hint that conservative white males do not stand the same chance of landing a post. You, Dick, with your influential connections, could have overridden all that and found me a position in an emporium of higher learning. But alas, you did not do so. What unpardonable flaw in my scholarship or character did you seize upon to convince yourself that the sinecure that you enjoyed should be denied to Alexander Harrison? I went mano a mano with grosso modo and centena, about 100 Algerian OAS counter-terrorists, ex-counter-terrorists, and conducted every interview in French. How many students have you advised who could credibly make the same claim? Yet many of them ended up with university sinecures thanks to you. Alexander Harrison was left les mains vides, empty-handed. Having pinpointed the problem, what is the remedy? C'est très simple, il n'est pas compliqué. An apology from you and reparations from the university for all the years lost for a promising academic career at a college or university in tatters, ruined. This man's world that I entered, where others feared to tread, carried risks, no matter how rocambolesque they might have seemed in retrospect. Recall one night, Dick, after a pastis-drenched soirée spent at the home of a former activist in Toulon in 1979, Edward Slama, nicknamed Doudou, unveiled a .38 revolver from the back of his car in front of the hotel where I was staying. The gun swayed the towel and whispered, even though it was about 3 a.m. and the street deserted, "Si jamais tu ne trahissais." But I digress. The fundamental point was that I was treated extremely unfairly by you and other members of the history department who did not help me to secure a college or university post. And it is time now to régler les comptes, or settle one's hash, by taking this issue to court. Even if the case is dismissed, judged without standing, the publicity therefrom would make the process worthwhile by bringing to light not only my plight as a conservative male historian, but that of others who find themselves confronted with the same challenge. And if I were to show up one day in Warwick and ask you, Dick, to explain your dissembling, what would be your reply? If I were to show up on your doorstep one day and query you gentiment on your failure to vigorously defend Alexander Harrison, to do your utmost to help me secure a position at the university or college level when I clearly deserved it, what would be your response? If anyone held all the cards, Dick, it was you. Richard Hull. You not only had contacts through the groves of academe, but were with the enfant chéri, favorite of Maurice Templesman, one of the world's wealthiest, most powerful men in Africa and throughout the world. Ran into Templesman several times. Tout à fait comme par hasard, since we shopped at the same pastry shop at 78th and Madison. I was also on his yacht once as an interpreter for language services. Must have been in the early 1980s. Talk about occasion manquée. You had the chance to help me get my foot in the door at a university with his help, but you would not lift a finger to assist. Explain to me, therefore, the pourquoi of your refusal to do so.